The Ashbourne estate slept in silence. Billionaire Adrian Hale descended to the kitchen for water. But a soft glow led him to the impossible 16-year-old Marin Blake. The maid's daughter stood alone at the sink, washing mountains of dishes at 3 in the morning, her hands trembling with exhaustion. The next day, he learned why she'd been missing school, and he stood frozen in disbelief. The Ashbourne estate stretched across 12 acres of manicured gardens and cold marble halls. Adrian Hale had built an empire in tech, amassed billions, and earned respect from every corner of the business world. But inside these walls he lived alone. No family, no warmth, just silence, and the hum of central air conditioning. He barely noticed the people who kept his world running. Nora Blake had worked for him for over a decade, quiet, dependable, never asking for anything beyond her modest salary. She cleaned, cooked, managed the household with the kind of invisible efficiency that wealthy people take for granted. Adrian knew her name, signed her checks, and that was the extent of their relationship. He'd seen her daughter around a few times. Marin, 16 years old. Always polite, always neat, always somewhere in the background with a book in her hands. She never caused trouble. Never asked for anything. In fact, Adrian couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her speak more than a few words. She seemed like a good kid. Quiet. Smart, according to Nora. But that was all he knew. And honestly, he'd never thought to ask more. Life in the Ashbourne estate moved like clockwork. Adrian worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, attended board meetings across 3 continents. When he was home, he stayed in his office or his bedroom. The kitchen, the laundry room, the staff quarters. Those were territories he never entered. Until that night. It was 3 in the morning when insomnia pulled him from bed. He padded downstairs in his robe, throat dry, mind still racing with tomorrow's product launch. The house was dark, except for a single light glowing faintly from the direction of the kitchen. He frowned. Nora usually finished her work by 9. No one should be awake at this hour. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard it. The soft rush of running water, the delicate clink of dishes touching porcelain. Adrian moved closer, curiosity overtaking caution, and then he saw her. Marin stood at the industrial sink, her small frame dwarfed by the stainless steel counter. Mountains of plates, bowls, and glassware surrounded her. She worked methodically, scrubbing each piece with hands that moved too slowly, too carefully, like someone fighting exhaustion with sheer willpower. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her shoulders sagged. Adrian stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. "Marin," she gasped, nearly dropping the plate in her hands. Water splashed across the counter as she spun around, eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "It's 3 in the morning." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "What are you doing?" She clutched the dish towel like a lifeline, her gaze dropping to the floor. I wanted to help my mom. She's been really tired lately, and I thought..." "Where is your mother?" "Sleeping. She doesn't know I'm down here." Marin's voice cracked slightly. "Please don't tell her. She'll just worry." Adrian stared at this child, because that's what she was, a child standing in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, doing work that wasn't hers to do. Her hands were raw. Her face was pale. And those eyes, those exhausted, frightened eyes told a story he'd never bothered to see. Something twisted in his chest. But before he could say another word, before this moment could deepen into something he wasn't ready to face, let me pause here. If you're still listening, if this story has reached you wherever you are in the world, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I really want to know how far these stories travel. Now back to that kitchen. Adrian couldn't sleep after that. He returned to his bedroom, but the image of Marin's trembling hands wouldn't leave his mind. A 16-year-old girl exhausted beyond measure, scrubbing dishes in the dead of night. Why, and more importantly, why hadn't he noticed before Adrian couldn't stop watching after that night? Not in an intrusive way, but with the kind of attention he'd never paid to anything outside quarterly reports and market trends. He started noticing things. Small things. The kind of details that had always been there but invisible to him. Marin was everywhere. In the laundry room at 7 in the morning, folding towels that should have been Nora's responsibility. In the garden at noon, pulling weeds between the rose bushes. In the living room at 4 dusting shelves, while a textbook lay open on the coffee table beside her, pages filled with highlighted notes she clearly hadn't had time to read. She moved through the house like a ghost. Silent, efficient, exhausted. Adrian watched her yawn 3 times in the span of 10 minutes while reading in the corner of the library. Her head would dip forward, then jerk back up as she forced herself awake. She'd blink hard, rub her eyes, and return to the page with grim determination. This wasn't normal. He walked past the laundry room one afternoon and stopped. Clothes hung everywhere on drying racks over chairs draped across every available surface, all hand-washed. He recognized his own shirts among them. Nora always used the washing machine. Why would anyone do this by hand? Then he saw Marin's hands up close for the first time. She was carrying a basket of linens through the hallway when he passed her. Her fingers were red and chapped, the skin around her knuckles cracked from repeated exposure to water and harsh detergent. Chemical burns his mind supplied. From dish soap. From bleach. His stomach turned. That evening his head housekeeper mentioned something in passing. Nora's been having terrible back pain lately. I've seen her wince when she bends down, but she won't take time off. Adrian's jaw tightened. The next morning his phone rang. The school. Marin's school. Mr. Hale, I'm calling about Marin Blake. She's missed 3 consecutive days without any explanation from her mother. We're concerned. This isn't like her, she's always been an excellent student. 3 days, Adrian repeated slowly. Yes, sir. We've tried reaching Mrs. Blake, but she hasn't returned our calls. If Marin continues to miss school without a valid reason, we'll have no choice but to involve social services. He hung up, his mind racing. Why hadn't Nora mentioned this? Did she even know? For the first time in years, Adrian felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not anger, not frustration, responsibility. He'd lived in this house for over a decade, employed these people, signed their paychecks, and never once asked if they were okay. Never once looked beyond the surface to see what was really happening under his own roof. That night he couldn't sleep again. At 3 in the morning he went downstairs. Not for water this time. He knew exactly what he'd find. And he was right. The kitchen light glowed softly in the darkness. The sound of running water echoed through the empty halls. But when Adrian stepped into the doorway this time, his breath caught. Marin wasn't standing at the sink. She was slumped over the kitchen table, her head resting on her folded arms. A dish towel dangled from her limp hand. Her breathing was deep, and even the kind of sleep that comes from complete and utter exhaustion. She'd collapsed. Adrian moved closer, his footsteps silent on the tile floor. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the paleness of her skin, the way her thin shoulders rose and fell with each breath. She looked so small, so fragile, so utterly alone. He reached out slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. Marin. She jolted awake with a gasp, nearly falling off the chair. Her eyes darted around wildly before landing on him, and then the tears came. Not loud sobs. Just silent streams running down her cheeks as her entire body began to shake. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't let my mom get fired. She's in so much pain, and if she can't finish her work, you'll replace her, and we can't afford that. We can't afford anything." Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush, and Adrian felt something crack open inside him. "Please don't fire her. Please. I'll work harder. I'll do better. Just please don't take her job away." He was looking at real fear, the kind of fear that keeps children awake at night, the kind of fear he'd once known himself a lifetime ago. Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. His voice came out softer than he'd intended. "Tell me everything." Marin wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving wet streaks across her cheeks. For a long moment, she just stared at the table, as if weighing whether honesty would save her or destroy her. Then she spoke. "I've been working at a car wash. The one on Riverside Avenue. Night shifts 10 to 2 in the morning. That's why I've been missing school. I go straight from there to home, help finish whatever Mom couldn't get done, then try to sleep for a few hours before class. But some days I'm just too tired, so I stay home to catch up on the housework instead." Adrian's hands clenched into fists under the table. "You're 16 years old. I know." Her voice was barely audible. "But we needed the money." "For what?" Marin's lips trembled. "My mom has a herniated disc. It's been getting worse for 2 years now. She's in constant pain, sometimes she can barely stand up straight. The doctors said she needs surgery, but we don't have insurance that covers it. The medical bills just kept piling up and we couldn't pay them. We still owe the hospital over $40,000. $40,000. To Adrian, that was lunch with investors, a spontaneous weekend trip, a rounding error in his quarterly budget. To this family, it was insurmountable. "She's been taking pain medication just to get through her shifts." Marin continued, her words spilling out faster now, as if a dam had broken. "But it's not enough anymore. I see her wince every time she bends down, every time she lifts something. She tries to hide it from me, but I know she's hurting." "Why didn't she tell me?" Adrian's voice came out harsher than he meant it to. "Why didn't she ask for help?" Marin looked up at him then, and the expression in her eyes was something he'd never forget. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, it was pity. "Because people like us don't ask people like you for help, Mr. Hale. We just try to survive quietly and hope we don't get noticed." The words hit him like a physical blow. She was right. In his world, problems were solved with phone calls and wire transfers. In theirs, problems were endured in silence because the alternative was losing everything. "I thought if I could just earn enough," Marin whispered, "maybe I could help pay down some of the debt. Maybe take some of the pressure off her. She works so hard for us. She's been working so hard for so long. I just wanted to give something back." "So you sacrificed your education, your sleep, your childhood." "I'm not a child anymore." Her jaw set with quiet defiance. "I haven't been for a long time." Adrian leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words settling over him like lead. Here he sat in a mansion with more rooms than he could count, with wealth he could never spend in 10 lifetimes. And 10 feet away from his bedroom, a woman had been suffering in silence while her daughter worked herself to the bone trying to save her. He hadn't seen it, hadn't wanted to see it, because seeing it would have required him to care, to step outside the comfortable bubble of his own existence and acknowledge that other people's pain was real and immediate and happening right under his roof. "The car wash doesn't pay much," Marin continued quietly. "But it's something. And the housework, if I can do it, then Mom can rest more. Maybe her back will get better on its own. Maybe we won't need the surgery after all." "That's not how herniated discs work." "I know." Her voice cracked. "But what else am I supposed to do?" The question hung in the air between them. What else was she supposed to do? She was 16. She should have been worried about homework and friends and what college she wanted to attend. Instead, she was working 2 jobs, sleeping 3 hours a night, and carrying the weight of her mother's health on shoulders far too young for that burden. Adrian thought about his own teenage years. The hunger, the fear, the nights he'd lain awake wondering if his family would make it through another month. He'd clawed his way out of that poverty through intelligence, ruthlessness, and a fair amount of luck. But he'd forgotten what it felt like. He'd forgotten that for every person who escaped, thousands more remained trapped in that same desperate cycle, working themselves to exhaustion, sacrificing everything, invisible to people like him. Until now. He looked at Marin, really looked at her, and saw himself. Saw the determination mixed with desperation. Saw the pride that refused to break even as everything else crumbled. And for the first time in years, Adrian Hale felt something he thought he'd lost long ago. Shame. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office until dawn, staring at financial statements he couldn't focus on, his mind replaying Marin's words over and over. By the time the sun rose, he'd made a decision. For the first time in 10 years, Adrian Hale walked into his own kitchen at 7 in the morning. Nora was already there, moving slowly as she prepared breakfast. He saw it now, the way she braced herself against the counter before bending down. The way her face tightened with pain when she thought no one was looking. The way she moved like someone decades older than her actual age. How had he missed this Nora? She turned, startled. "Mr. Hale. I didn't expect, can I get you something?" Sit down. Sir. Please. Sit down. Confusion flickered across her face, but she obeyed, lowering herself carefully into a chair. Adrian pulled out the seat across from her the same way he'd sat with Maren hours earlier. You need to take time off, he said. For your back. I'm arranging for you to see a specialist. The color drained from Nora's face. Mr. Hale, I can work. I promise I can. I'm not firing you. She stopped mid-sentence, her mouth still open. I'm not firing you, Adrian repeated slower this time. But you're in pain. You need medical attention. And you're going to get it. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. I can't afford. I'm not asking you to. Silence filled the kitchen. Nora stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. As if kindness itself was something she couldn't quite comprehend. Why? She whispered finally. Because I was blind, Adrian thought. Because I stopped seeing people as people. But he didn't say that. Instead, he simply replied, because it's the right thing to do. After Nora left the kitchen, still in shock, still wiping tears from her face, Adrian made another call. This one to a private investigator. I need you to look into a car wash on Riverside Avenue. Find out if they're employing a minor named Maren Blake for night shifts. I want documentation. If they were exploiting a 16-year-old girl, he'd make sure they paid for it. But as he hung up, another thought struck him. Maren had been trying to reach him. Trying to save her mother. And when Adrian had finally noticed, when he'd finally seen the truth, Maren's first instinct had been to beg him not to punish them. She'd expected cruelty. Because that's what people like him had taught people like her to expect. Adrian walked to his office and stood at the window overlooking the estate. The gardens stretched out below him, pristine and perfect. He'd built all of this. He'd earned every dollar, every accolade, every measure of success. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten where he came from. His own childhood had been nothing like this. He'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mother and 2 younger sisters. His father had left when Adrian was 12, and his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. He remembered watching her come home at midnight, exhausted, her feet swollen from standing all day. Remembered the fear in her eyes when the rent was due and they were $50 short. He remembered being hungry, being scared, being invisible to people who had more than enough, but couldn't be bothered to notice those who had nothing. He'd sworn he'd never be that powerless again. And he'd succeeded. But in becoming powerful, he'd also become the very thing he'd once hated. He'd become the person who didn't see, who didn't care, who existed in a bubble so removed from reality that a child could be suffering 10 feet away, and he wouldn't notice until she collapsed from exhaustion in his kitchen. When had he turned into this? When had wealth become a wall instead of a tool? Adrian pressed his hand against the cold glass and made himself a promise. He would fix this. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but because Maren deserved better than a world that forced children to sacrifice their futures for their parents' survival. And because somewhere in some parallel universe, a wealthy man had once helped his own mother when she needed it most. He could still remember her face the day someone had anonymously paid their overdue rent, the way she'd cried with relief, the way that single act of kindness had given them enough breathing room to survive another month. He'd never found out who did it. But he could be that person now. He could be the answer to someone else's desperate prayer. Starting today. 3 days later, Maren went back to school. Adrian had insisted. He'd told Nora that Maren's education was non-negotiable, that the housework could wait, that everything would be handled. Nora had agreed reluctantly, still confused by this sudden transformation in her employer, but too grateful to question it. Maren had returned to class exhausted but determined. She made it through first period, then second. By third period, she was struggling to keep her eyes open. The teacher's voice became a distant hum. The words on the board blurred together. She'd been surviving on 3 hours of sleep for so long that her body had forgotten what rest felt like. At lunch, she sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria the way she always did. That's when they found her. Look, it's the Maid's kid. Maren didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Chelsea Morgan and her friends, the daughters of the other families in Ashbourne Heights. The ones who lived in houses just as big as Adrian's. The ones who'd never worked a day in their lives. I heard she washes dishes for my dad's business partner. Chelsea continued loud enough for nearby tables to hear. How pathetic is that, living in a mansion but still being the help? Laughter rippled through the group. Maren kept her eyes on her tray. Don't engage, don't react, just let it pass. My mom said your mom is like basically a servant. Does that make you a servant too? Another girl chimed in. Do you have to curtsy when you see Mr. Hale? More laughter. I bet that's why she's always so tired, Chelsea said mockingly. Probably scrubbing toilets all night. God, imagine being so poor you have to. That's enough. The voice came from behind them. A teacher. The group scattered like roaches when the lights came on, still giggling as they walked away. But the damage was done. Maren sat frozen, her hands clenched so tightly around her fork that her knuckles turned white. The cafeteria noise continued around her conversations, laughter, the clatter of trays, but she heard none of it. She just stared at her untouched food, willing herself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She made it through the rest of the day on autopilot. When the final bell rang, she gathered her books and headed for the bus. But halfway down the hallway, the exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. Her vision swam. Her legs felt like lead. She needed to get home. Needed to help her mother. Needed to prove she could handle everything. But her body had other plans. Maren made it to the school's front steps before the world tilted sideways. She grabbed for the railing, missed, and felt herself falling. The concrete rushed up to meet her. Then nothing. She woke up in an unfamiliar room. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? What happened? How long had she been unconscious? Then she recognized the medical equipment. The private exam table. The expensive artwork on the walls. She was in the medical wing of the Ashbourne estate. A room she'd cleaned dozens of times but never thought she'd occupy as a patient. Adrian sat in a chair beside the bed, his expression unreadable. You collapsed, he said simply. At school. They called me. Maren tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, The doctor says you're severely sleep-deprived and malnourished. His voice was calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath it. You've been running on empty for so long that your body finally gave out. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. I tried. I really tried to keep going. I thought if I just pushed through. Why didn't you eat lunch today? The question caught her off guard. What? The school said you didn't touch your food. Why? Maren turned her face away, shame burning through her chest. She didn't want to tell him, didn't want to admit how small they'd made her feel. Maren. Adrian's voice softened. What happened? And so she told him. About Chelsea and her friends. About the constant comments, the mocking laughter, the way they treated her like she was less than human because her mother cleaned houses and she didn't wear designer clothes. About how it had been going on for months, getting worse each week, but she'd never said anything because what was the point? People like her didn't complain. They just endured. By the time she finished, Adrian's jaw was set so tightly, she could see the muscle twitching. Names, he said quietly. I want names. Mr. Hale, please don't. Names, Maren. Something in his tone made her obey. She listed them one by one, watching as he pulled out his phone and typed each name with deliberate precision. When she finished, he stood up. You're not going back to that school, he said. But not until I've had a conversation with the principal, and their parents, and anyone else who thinks it's acceptable to torment a child for circumstances beyond her control. Maren stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Adrian didn't wait until morning. That same evening, while Maren rested under the doctor's supervision, he made a series of calls that would change everything. First to his attorney, then to his financial advisor, then to the principal of Ashbourne Heights Academy. By midnight, wheels were already in motion. But before any of that could take full effect, Adrian needed to have one more conversation. The most important one. He found Maren still awake in the medical wing, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. She looked so small in that bed, so fragile, like a strong wind could blow her away. He pulled up the same chair and sat down. I need to ask you something, he said quietly. And I want you to answer honestly. What do you want most in this world? Marin turned her head to look at him, surprise flickering across her exhausted face. What, if you could have anything? If nothing was impossible? What would you want? She was quiet for a long moment, as if the question itself was a trap. As if wanting things was a luxury she'd never been allowed. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I want my mom to stop hurting. I want her to get the surgery she needs and not have to worry about the cost. I want her to be able to rest without being afraid she'll lose her job. Marin's eyes filled with tears. And I just want to go to school like a normal person. To learn things and have a future without feeling like I'm stealing time from something more important. That's all. That's all I've ever wanted. Adrian nodded slowly, something solidifying in his chest. Okay, he said simply. Okay. He stood up, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. From this moment forward, everything changes. Marin blinked at him, confusion and hope warring on her face. Your mother's medical bills, all $43,000 of them, will be paid in full by tomorrow morning. The surgery has already been scheduled for next week with the best orthopedic surgeon in the state. She'll have a full recovery period with pay, and when she returns to work, it will be in a significantly reduced capacity with a substantial raise. Mr. Hale, he held up a hand. I'm not finished. You will receive a full scholarship to any high school or university of your choosing. All expenses paid, tuition, books, housing if needed, everything. You'll have access to tutors, counselors, whatever support you need to catch up on the education you've missed and to thrive going forward. Tears streamed down Marin's face, now her hands pressed to her mouth. Effective immediately, you are forbidden from doing any housework in this estate. You're a student, not an employee. Your job is to be 16 years old and figure out who you want to become. Adrian's voice softened. And regarding the bullying at school, I've spoken with the principal. There will be a full investigation, mandatory sensitivity training for the entire student body, and very serious consequences for anyone involved. If you decide you want to return there, you'll do so safely. If not, we'll find you somewhere better. I don't... Marin's voice broke. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Adrian sat back down, and for the first time he let his own walls come down. Because I was you once, he said quietly. Different circumstances, same desperation. I know what it's like to watch your parents suffer and feel powerless to help. I know what it's like to sacrifice everything and still feel like it's not enough. And I know what it's like to be invisible to people who could help, but choose not to see. He looked directly into her eyes. I became successful so I'd never be powerless again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what that powerlessness felt like. I forgot to use what I have to actually help people. You reminded me. His voice grew rough with emotion. You and your mother have worked in my home for years, and I never truly saw you. I never asked if you were okay. I never looked beyond the surface. That ends now. Marin was openly sobbing, her thin shoulders shaking. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Adrian's expression was serious. I need you to understand something, Marin. I'm not doing this because I'm generous. I'm doing this because it's right. Because I have resources I can't possibly use, and you have needs I can easily meet. The math is simple. He stood again, preparing to leave, then paused at the door. I owe you and your mother more than I ever realized. You've taken care of my home, my life, my comfort for years. The least I can do is take care of you. Later that night, when Nora learned the truth, all of it from Marin's night job to her collapse to Adrian's intervention, she broke down completely. Adrian found her in the hallway, her back against the wall, sobbing into her hands. I didn't know, she kept saying. I didn't know she was carrying all of this. Adrian knelt beside her, something he'd never done for anyone. She didn't want you to know, he said gently. She was protecting you the same way you've been protecting her. Nora looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing her. 6 months later, the Ashbourne estate felt different. Not because anything physical had changed, but because the people within it had transformed. Nora had recovered from her surgery and returned to work lighter duties, reasonable hours, genuine rest. The chronic pain that had shadowed her for years was finally gone, replaced by a quiet joy Adrian had never seen before. And Maren. She'd returned to school with her head held high. The bullying had stopped after Adrian's intervention, and she'd thrown herself into her studies with the fierce determination of someone who finally believed she had a future worth fighting for. Her grades soared. Her confidence grew. She'd even joined the debate team. But the biggest change was in Adrian himself. He'd started noticing people. Really noticing them. The gardener who worked through rain. The delivery driver who always smiled despite long hours. The barista who remembered his order and asked about his day. Everywhere he looked, he saw the invisible threads that held the world together. People working hard, sacrificing quietly, hoping desperately. And he began using his resources differently. Not for recognition or tax deductions, but because he'd learned a truth that wealth had almost made him forget. Money wasn't the thing that saved Maren and Nora. Attention was. Seeing them. Asking questions. Caring enough to look beyond the surface and acknowledge their humanity. Anyone could have done that. Anyone could have noticed. But no one had, including him, until it was almost too late. Some people move through life so quietly that the world forgets they exist. They work in shadows, suffer in silence, and carry burdens no one else can see. But behind every invisible person is a story of courage, sacrifice, and relentless hope. All it takes is one person willing to truly look, one person willing to see, and everything can change. This story ends here. Thank you for spending your precious time listening. Although this is a fictional story created to evoke emotion and inspiration, I hope it left something meaningful for you. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, feel free to explore other videos right here on the Maid's Daughter Stories channel, and don't forget to subscribe. Your presence truly means a lot to this channel. See you in the next video.